Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started. Good to see so many folks this morning. So today we may finish this lecture, just depends on how fast I talk. Either way, a lot of what we're going to do on Monday is a in-class assignment that will help you with your poster. So do plan to be here at least on Zoom if you can't be here in person. A reminder that I am at a conference this weekend, so I will not be that available via email. It's going to be a little bit of a whirlwind. I fly out tomorrow. I present twice on Friday, run a meeting on Saturday, and then take a red eye back Saturday night. So I won't really be coherent until Monday again. So, you know, please understand if I don't get back to you right away on an email. It's not that I'm purposely ignoring you. It is that it's, like I said, just going to be a little bit of a whirlwind. Alrighty. And again, just a reminder, we do have class Monday, but no class next Wednesday or Friday, so that everyone can enjoy whatever version of thankfulness you do. And then we have a week of classes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, when we get back. And then the following Monday, I'll distribute exam 4. And then that Friday is our exam time where y'all will give your presentations of your posters. So going till the end of the semester here. Again, remember to be working on catching up on perusals and things like that to get you the maximum number of points possible. The other thing I want to announce, and I'll send out an email when this is live, my lab has a study that we're going to post today on Sonos. You can do that for a PEC. And my understanding, there's one other study posted. It's a light semester for studies, unfortunately, but as you know, you can use articles for your other PECs. So, but I will send you all an email via Blackboard when that is posted. It's a 10-minute or less study, and we would appreciate your participation. Alrighty. Yep, I think that is everything for now. Any questions about the logistics of anything coming up? Awesome. As always, please feel free to grab me after class. Talk to me at any point if you do have questions. Okay, so if you remember, we ended last class by talking about the social determinants of health, right? These sort of bigger picture issues that often have more impact on your health than some of the things they blame you for. So one of the things that a video did not say, but that I've heard before, is that your zip code where you live is a bigger determinant of your health than a lot of things that we quote unquote blame people for, like their weight. And that's because of certain zip codes tend to be related to your socioeconomic status. And so what is the antidote to that? So there is a fundamental fact that is important as we try to understand these misconceptions. And these are not just within the general public. It's sad because they're excellent, well-meaning, educated people, but doctors, nurses, other people within the healthcare system will leave these myths too and don't take these other factors into account, right? So these misconceptions associated with health behavior, we know that no one arrives at any learning opportunity or decision point with a total lack of knowledge. Everyone brings something. You know, when I worked with therapy clients, I used to say, you know, I'm the expert on the therapy, but you're the expert on you, right? We need both of us to make this work. Even kiddos bring knowledge, students, patients, teachers, doctors. They all bring some previous information to any situation. And any effort to teach or learn that fails to acknowledge that people come with their own preconceived notions, it may be doomed to fail. I think I told you all earlier in the semester about, we talked about how learning styles aren't real. And like, there's a lot of effort to try to help teachers understand that learning styles aren't real. And every effort to sort of reteach them about this might work for like right after the study, but then like a week later, they go back to their preconceived notions. The preconceived information or the pre-existing information that we bring is called a pre-concept. And that's a pre-existing idea or belief that people bring to a situation, which may conflict with the scientific understanding of that particular situation. And Bark and his colleagues highlighted the importance of identifying discrepancies between these and achieving conceptual growth by adjusting thinking to bring mistaken preconcepts in line with the scientific explanations. So it's like trying to reduce cognitive dissonance. It's hard. You can't just do it all at once, right? And it's one of the reasons, not surprisingly, that we do a whole semester-long course about this, right? So that you all can start to think really scientifically as you go forward in your psychology careers. However, we know that people do behave in ways that are harmful to their health, right? So several of the videos we've watched have used smoking as an example. I would say this day and age, it's maybe vaping more. We also know that people abuse alcohol, right? I'm certainly not condemning enjoying a drink or three with some friends, but there are people who are unfortunately drinking every day, drinking and driving. Not only is that a danger to their own health, it's a danger to everybody else on the road, right? A car is essentially a weapon. And so if you're driving that while impaired, it's problematic. Other things that people do, sometimes they can't help, like exposure to toxic chemicals. If anyone's ever seen the movie Erin Brockovich, right? That's a really nice representation of this. If your home's across the street from any kind of industrial plants, right? You're probably getting exposure to something you don't want exposure to, but that doesn't mean that you have the ability to move away from it, right? And so sometimes systematic, well-organized classes designed to provide knowledge or promote behavior change can be effective. And so like these would be used as interventions and what we would often call psychoeducation. So Rustard and Smith found that a comprehensive approach to teaching nutritional information produced both knowledge increases and improvement in health-related behavior. But that correlation is low, right? So maybe instead we should focus on changing actual behavior, not just on thoughts, emotions, and what they're telling you they're doing, right? I don't know if anybody else has this experience. I finally just like decided to be honest, but for years when the hygienist at the dentist was like, do you floss? I was like, sometimes. And now I'm just like, no, I don't floss. I know I should, but I just don't, right? They're going to be able to tell. So one of the most effective approaches is looking at knowledge of facts, self-monitoring on health-related behaviors and their consequences, principles of reinforcement for healthy behaviors, and cognitive strategies like positive imagery. And these reflect the essence of scientific literacy, essentially applied to a health-related situation. So this has helped in reducing hypertension, which is the precursor to high blood pressure, risky sexual behavior and obesity. And there's a basis for effective self-control of health-related behaviors. And self-control is related to fewer both physical and mental health symptoms. And self-control is, I'm sure, what they call the variable they're looking at. But like a lot of times when we study this, we actually call it self-efficacy. It's like your belief in your ability to do something, right? If you think that trying to change your behavior is just overwhelming, right? You're not going to do it. Or you're going to do it like a day and be like, I can't do this and give up, right? I'll give you all an example. I had gestational diabetes when I was pregnant. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with this, but essentially you develop the symptoms of diabetes while you're pregnant just because of how your body reacts with the fetus. And it can be pretty dangerous for a couple reasons. It can lead to different problems in the mom. It can lead to a giant baby, which is problematic potentially during delivery, right? And so they detected it pretty early in my pregnancy. They usually don't test for it till a little later, but like one little screening, they're like, "Oh, let's test you for this." And so I think I was like 3 months in when they detected it. So then for the last 6 months of my pregnancy, I had to be monitoring it. And so I worked with a nutritionist, I worked with a nurse practitioner. I had a very strict regime where I got up, had to test my blood sugar, went on a walk, ate breakfast, had to test my blood sugar. There were times I had to test my blood sugar while I was in class teaching. I'm sure I didn't say anything about it, but I'm sure the students were like, "What the hell is going on?" Right? I had to eat this crazy calculus of a diet that it was like this many proteins and this many carbs and this many veggies at each meal. Like I remember a couple of my friends were over and I'm like counting out goldfish. And they were like, "This looks like disordered eating." And I was like, "Oh, I know," right? But this is what I have to do to keep myself and my fetus healthy. And it worked, but it was tough work and it was exhausting. And I know other people, especially people who were diagnosed mostly later in pregnancy, who said, "Yeah, I just didn't even bother." They were like, "Whatever," and so it's whether you think you can do it, whether you have the motivation. And for me, it was like an assignment. This is your assignment. Let's see if you can make the numbers good. And I could do it. But for other people, that didn't work, right? So they probably needed a different motivational strategy. Alrighty, so one of the things we talk about quite a bit in psychology and when we're thinking about well-being, when we're thinking about positive psychology is happiness. So what is happiness to you? And folks in Zoom, feel free to throw it in the chat. Yeah, Galen.
I was having this community something like this.
Yeah, I think that that's really important. I really like that inclusion of, people that you care about. I think that's really important to a lot of folks. Other ideas? Yeah, Olivia. Oh yeah, for sure. Pets, right? Oh my gosh, my daughter's like obsessed with our cat right now, and it is the cutest thing ever. Like before she goes to school, she says she hugs him and says, "I'm gonna miss you, Simba." And then when she gets back, she says, "I missed you, Simba." Meanwhile, when I drop her off at school, she gets out of the car and the teacher's like, "Aren't you gonna say goodbye?" And she just keeps walking. I know she loves me, but it's just funny in contrast. Yeah, so for a lot of us, it's being around people or animals we care about, right? I think for some of us, it's doing activities we enjoy, right? So for me, I really like reading non-scholarly books in my downtime. This has actually been funny several times at conferences where I've like sat next to somebody, on a bus or something going to the conference and they don't realize that I'm going to the conference because I'm not reading a scholarly book. I'm reading like a novel on my Kindle, right? Let's see what we got in the chat here. For Ayana says the true happiness to me is when I feel like I've reached a certain state of mind or peace. Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of really interesting psychological research about that in particular. There is a psychologist named Csikszentmihalyi who studied this state called flow. And the idea was this is like when you can get to an optimal state of being and you just like everything is clicking. And it's this, you feel like you're at peace. And some people get it when they're writing. It is what some people call runner's high, right? Things along those lines. People who are creating artwork. And how about what's well-being to y'all? What does it mean to experience well-being? Yeah. Yeah, that it can definitely be about yeah, trying to make sure your health is as good as it can be, right? And whether that's just being healthy or it's taking medications you need to take, right? Following up with doctor's appointments you need to do. Yeah. And obviously there's a psychological component to that as well. We know the mind and the body are connected, and so they can influence and interact with each other. And so here is your book's definition, which is the pretty standard definitions of these things. So subjective well-being is an individual's self-perceived interpretation of their quality of life at any particular point in time. So it's sort of like, right now, what is my life like? Do I feel like I'm fulfilled? Do I feel like I'm getting what I need, my basic needs? Are my psychological needs being fulfilled? Right. And this might differ from day to day, from month to month, right? This might feel different during the academic year than it feels during the summer for folks, right? And then happiness is an emotional state of well-being, whereas subjective well-being is more of like thinking. Happiness is feeling the well-being. There are a couple different related concepts here. One that they talk about is the primacy and the recency effect. So these are cognitive concepts, and they're like when you have to learn a list of words, say. Primacy effect is you tend to remember the first thing someone says to you, because you encountered it first. It's the first thing you think about. The primacy effect is one of the reasons why we can struggle to like unlearn something, right? And then the recency effect is you remember what just happened more clearly. So remembering more items from an end of a list or stuff that you've more recently encountered, right? So for example, when I teach my internship in psychology course, I have folks do a reflection every week. And sometimes they're like, what, like this week was the same as every other week. And I'm like, well, just write that. And what they say at the end of the semester is they're so glad they did that, because they don't remember in May what they did in February at their site, right? And so if I just had them try to remember it off the top of their head when they wrote their paper at the end, they might remember like the very first thing they did and then what they've been recently doing, and maybe miss some important things that happened in the middle. Hedonic adaptation is adjustment to events affecting happiness, such that those events lose their influence over happiness levels. So for example, when you get a new job, you might be really happy and really excited, right? But then once you settle in, you might kind of feel like, oh, this feels like the last job I had. It's just sort of drudgery. Maybe I'm not happier than I ever was before. And related to that is the hedonic treadmill, which is adaptation to happy life events, so that some people start to feel that you need material possessions to improve your happiness, right? I need this. Well, I bought myself the Tesla and I'm still not happy, so maybe I need to buy a mansion, right? And I get no one in here is at that point in their life, including me, right? But there are people for whom this is the case, and it can be on a smaller scale, right? Oh, I bought myself a little something off Amazon, but I'm still like blur, so maybe I'll go buy something a little more, right? So anecdotes here. There's this concept of the invisible threads of connections to others, which is exactly what you all brought up when you talked about happiness, right? So these researchers showed the importance of relationships with others to happiness and well-being. And for humans in particular, this is important because we are pack animals, right? One of the reasons we get along so well with dogs is that we're both pack animals, right? Humans in general like to be around each other. Obviously that fluctuates, right? People who are super introverted or socially anxious may struggle more, right? But in general, people sort of depend on other people for things. And I really like this, that they said it's the quality, not the quantity of your social relationships that seem to matter most. So again, that very introverted person who doesn't like to go out and socialize might have the best, deepest friendships with like 2 or 3 people, right? And that's what they need to be happy. In fact, they found that relationship satisfaction, independent of any kind of income, was a reliable predictor of happiness. And again, this doesn't have to be romantic relationships. It can be friendships. It can be relationships with your family. Their findings also included significant correlations between optimism and happiness, and between perceived self-help and happiness. So, or self-perceived help. There we go. So yeah, if you tend to look on the bright side of things and you think your health is doing well, that's also going to be related. So the search for happiness and subjective well-being and satisfying relationship is more likely to be fruitful than an effort to find them in possessions or money. Everyone in here knows that intuitively, right? But we live in a very capitalistic society that sort of tries to convince us that in order to be happy, we need to spend money, right? 'Tis the season where we'll start seeing all those ads of like cars in the driveway with big bows on them. And I just think like, if someone just bought me a car and didn't ask me what features I needed, right, I might be like, thanks, I guess, right? It just seems like something that should be like a discussion you have before you just go buy a Lexus, right? Relationships in both personal and work-related contexts and an optimistic explanatory style may contribute to positive perceptions of well-being and health. Again, correlations don't prove causation, but the absence of a reliable correlation. So for example, over and over and over again, they found that once you're at a certain level of income where you can comfortably provide for yourself, there isn't a relationship between money and happiness, does indicate the absence of a causal connection. So basically, if there's not a correlation, we can pretty confident, and we find that over and over and over, we can pretty confidently say there's no causation, right? And so again, like having good relationships at work can be really important. To be perfectly honest with you all, there are days I am completely disillusioned with the administration here at VWU, right? I'm like, what the heck are they doing? But I love my colleagues. My colleagues are super supportive. And honestly, I come every day for y'all, right? I really enjoy teaching y'all. I enjoy trying to like create bonds with y'all, right? And like the students here are the reason I came here initially. That like every other school I interviewed at, students like maybe 1 or 2 would ask me a question after my job talk, and here like a lot of students ask me questions. And I was like, this is the type of place I want to teach, right? And that has carried over, right? Y'all ask excellent questions. You're always curious. You always want to learn. And that's what really rewards professors. There's a number of types of behaviors or experiences that can contribute to happiness or subjective well-being, again, without the need to monetary or material gain. I'm just gonna like take a little side. I feel like your book is trying really hard to be like, money doesn't cause happiness. And I feel like you all get that, right? I think maybe this book was written with like very affluent students in mind, you know, the kind who like their parents could pay for Harvard out of pocket. And I know full well that wasn't me. That's not y'all, right? So like this is a little bit of preaching to the choir. So, but they talk about positive emotions are linked to generous behavior towards others, including spending money on others, to optimism, to expression of gratitude. Gratitude is a really interesting one. There's been a lot of really interesting research about gratitude, and not only gratitude to other people, but just gratitude in general for your existence. A lot of that can really help with mood and can help with mindfulness. And it's being incorporated into a lot of different psychotherapies now, which is really interesting to think about. And many studies have shown that spending money on experiences is a greater contributor to well-being than material possessions. So This is very true of my generation. Millennials are much more likely to want to spend money on experiences than possessions. Example, my husband and I took a very lovely honeymoon, right? And we were much more eager to spend money on that than like both of our sets of parents were confused as to why we didn't put fine china on our wedding registry. It was like, why would we like make people spend money on plates we'll maybe use once a year, right? But like that used to be a thing that you did, right? It just wasn't that it was up for us. A lot of folks now, instead of doing a wedding registry for things, will do a honeymoon registry where you can like buy an experience for them on their honeymoon, things like that. And again, these idea of experiences being really important to happiness has some merit, right? The idea of like, if you think back in your life, you're not like, man, I was so happy when I bought that set of tongs, right? Maybe you were, maybe you really needed them, right? But probably if you remember that, it's because then you took those set of tongs home and you used it to grill up the most perfect steak you'd ever grilled, right? So the things we tend to remember are those experiences. You know, if you got to go to the Eras tour or maybe a little weekend trip you took with someone, right? Those are things that stand out in our minds. Psychological scientists have also worked to develop ways of helping people to guard against that hedonic adaptation. So if we simply adapt to every life change and revert to our former level of happiness, we'll be like, can we ever increase our happiness? But researchers have found that we can reduce this sort of like adaptation and sameness of happiness by continuing to frequently think about and pay attention to positive changes in our lives. The more interested in positive emotion we can derive from these events, the more we can continue to derive happiness for them, which helps us to get off that hedonic treadmill. And so, again, I think this really goes back to that idea of gratitude. My college was very, very white. But it meant that, you know, certain opportunities opened up. And so I, as again, a very, very white person myself, was able to be a member of our gospel choir. And one of the things I really love about gospel music is a lot of it is just about being thankful for existing, right? Like one of my favorite lyrics in one of the songs we sang was, for waking me up this morning, for starting me on my way, for letting me see the sunshine of a brand new day. I want to thank you, right? And just that idea of being grateful for waking up in the morning. There's something so powerful about that. All right, so we talked about psychological literacy a lot this semester, right? So it's the understanding of psychological knowledge and the ability to apply principles of psychological science to the challenges that we face in our everyday lives, personal, social, community life. To be perfectly honest, there will be times, maybe even in some of my classes, where you'll use psychological literacy to question things you're being taught, and that's what we want you to do, right? And then we've talked about system justification, which is defense and justification of the status quo, even when it's not helpful for you, it's not advantageous for you. And that can help to explain why people sometimes seem to vote against their own interests. Unfortunately, we will see this in particularly like rural, impoverished folks tend to vote a lot for candidates that don't necessarily represent, like they're not going to go out and get them tax cuts, right? They're going to go and get tax cuts for the rich. But the way that those candidates talk draws them in, right? And so people, very smart people, right, can end up voting against their own self-interest because of these things. And this can happen to rich people as well. This can happen to people of any SES. I think the rural impoverished folks are just sort of one of the most poignant examples. And we've been kind of talking about this all semester, right? So this question is sort of rhetorical. Psychology in general can answer a lot of questions for us, right? And we're still growing. Psychology as a science is very young, right? Biology and chemistry, physics have been established since at least the Renaissance, probably before that. The first psychology lab was founded in the 1870s. Right, so we've been around maybe 150 years. That's very young as a science. We've still got a lot to learn. So although researchers have developed many effective behavior change techniques, and in fact, the conference I'm going to this weekend is the Association of Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies. So a lot of what these therapies focus on is helping people to change their maladaptive behaviors. So for example, as an eating disorder therapist, a lot of what we worked on with people is changing those maladaptive eating habits. And we would do things like, let's just work on eating 3 meals and 3 snacks a day. Because a lot of time what happens with folks with eating disorders is that in addition to everything emotional going on, which we would of course also work on, they just go really long periods without eating. And then that makes them super hungry, right? And that can also affect your emotions. I don't know about y'all, but if I miss one meal, I get really hangry, right? And so imagine if you're missing 2 or 3 or basically all day. And so we work on basically kind of retraining your metabolism and getting yourself adequate nutrition through regular eating every like 3 to 4 hours. And it's hard for people at first, but that simple behavioral change can start to really set things in motion. Numerous health changes and challenges, and a lot of times those can be brief interventions. As a result, longer term maintenance of behavior change has often been neglected. Very true. So for example, despite some lofty marketing claims and frequent short-term success, many individuals in weight loss programs regain the lost weight or more within a year, and people who do smoking cessation programs relapse in 6 months. Yeah. As an eating disorder researcher, I can tell you the entire dieting industry is essentially a scam to get your money. Like, good for them for getting the money, but bad for them for giving people complexes, right? If diets worked, we wouldn't have to always come up with new ones, right? And in fact, even really life-altering things like getting bariatric surgery, stomach stapling, gastric banding, within 10 years, a lot of those folks gain the weight back, right? And so more and more folks from my side of the like eating disorder research are talking about what can we do to change health behaviors without focusing on weight, right? Okay, your blood pressure is high. Rather than focusing on losing weight, what are things we can do to get your blood pressure in particular to go down? Right? And those are very specific medicine and exercise and dietary things you can do. And sometimes that movement is called the health at every size movement. One approach to long-term behavior change that has shown some promise involves making public commitments. So if you make something like an environmental pledge, to recycle, to make sustainable life choices, to reduce driving, you're more likely to maintain that behavior than if you didn't publicly declare you were going to do it. Another way to show commitment is to persist in a fairly intensive program aimed at creating behavioral change. So again, maybe doing a really sustained program, but I'm skeptical of any weight loss program just because I've seen the very long-term research, and I've worked with folks who've been on diet after diet after diet who would lose the weight and then gain it, but then gain a little more. Lose the weight, gain it, gain a little more, right? It's just not sustainable for most folks. Modeling, some of you may remember this from learning about Bandura and his Bobo dolls, right? This can be very effective in producing durable and generalized altruistic behavior in kiddos. So the adult experimenter demonstrated generous behaviors like giving game winnings to charity. This also reminds me of one of my kiddos' favorite board games I absolutely love. It's the Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood game. And one of the things that happens is one of the things you can spin is a gift. and you give someone else who's playing the game a gift. And you can decide, are you gonna give them something that will help them on their way or not? And, you know, my kiddo every time is like, here, you get the thing that's gonna help you. And I just love that. She still kicks our asses, so I guess it doesn't matter. And we're like not trying to lose. She just always wins. um, so modeling other behavior techniques like intermittent reinforcement, naturally occurring reinforcement, systematic self-control are very effective to have long-term maintenance of behavior change, including as long as 5 years. So again, modeling is a technique that involves changing behavior through observation of another person engaging in a desirable behavior. This is also something that's used quite a bit in therapy. So for example, if you're working with someone who has a phobia of snakes, part of your task as the therapist will usually be to interact with the snake yourself. My grad advisor told us this great story where they were like, oh, she was in grad school. Oh, Jan, we've got a snake phobia case. You should take it on. You haven't done one yet. And she said, I can't. I'm afraid of the snake. And they're like, oh, now you have to do it. Try to get her exposure. And they do it with like a very gentle garter snake or python or something like that. So clearly we can make long-term effective changes in behaviors that affect our lives and health, as well as those in our community and cultures. And then we need to use science to do that. And that is a big part of what psychology is trying to advance, is how do we use science to help people make positive changes, sustainable changes in their lives. And so how do we respond to misinformation? We've talked about a lot of this over the semester, right? You all have done very well on exams responding to like social posts, right? You report certain things, other things you can just ignore if you want, right? I don't know if any of you have had Dr. Slivka in English, but one of her favorite things is to say, I would send a strongly worded letter, right? So you can do things like you can complain about things. I remember, wow, it was maybe like right after I started teaching here, so like 11, 12 years ago, JC Penney was selling a t-shirt that said something like, I'm too pretty to do math. And it was for girls. Yeah, exactly. Bryn just came like, and that's how we all felt. And a bunch of eating disorder and like other gender researchers wrote in and were like, this is really problematic. And within a day, it was pulled from the website. So you never know, you know, again, especially through collective action, what you might be able to do, right? Think about the unions that are out there right now, the writers, the actors, the auto workers, right? What was it, UPS or FedEx? Just they all just did really effective things, right? So if you band together and if you say, this is wrong, let's get the scientific community to try to correct this, a lot of times you can make change. Now, there are exceptions, as we just talked about. When people get certain ideas in their mind, it can be really hard to change. A lot of us have been trying, for me in sort of my personal life and my personal Twitter, right? Other people in their professional life to challenge misconceptions about the pandemic and vaccines for years. And there are certain people who are just not willing to listen to information. And some of the saddest stories I heard were about people who chose not to get vaccinated, getting put on ventilators in the hospital when they got COVID very severely and asking, can I get the vaccine now? And it's like, it's not going to help now, right? All right, so one of your readings was the debunking handbook. It sort of talked about how can we respond to misinformation, and we want to respond, right? Because it can do damage, right? When people are not getting vaccinated, it can lead to them or other people getting very ill, right? If people are, you know, engaging in not great practices, right? And it can lead to other problems, right? Has anyone ever seen the documentary Grizzly Man? I don't know if it's streaming anywhere. It's Werner Herzog, who has a great voice. If anyone's watched The Mandalorian season 1, he's the I would like to see the baby guy. And he narrates the story of this guy who wanted to be like Steve Irwin, but for grizzly bears. And you can imagine that did not go well, right? This man and unfortunately his girlfriend were eaten by a grizzly bear at the end. And it's just sort of a testament to someone who just like had the wrong idea, believed he could just like hang out with these grizzlies and be fine, right? Reaping what he sowed. Very sad. It can be sticky, as we just talked about. It can be really hard to change some of these concepts. So we want to preempt it if possible. We want to teach people the correct thing the first time instead of having to try to reprogram later. Okay? And we want to debunk misinformation often and properly. So some of the definitions talked about here: misinformation is that false information that's disseminated. And it can be that it's not meant to mislead. It's that people honestly think it's true, right? They share a link without checking it. But it can be problematic and it can be harmful. Disinformation is that misinformation that's deliberately disseminated to mislead, right? There are Russian bots out there doing that. Fake news, we've talked about a lot. It's that false information, often of a sensational nature, that mimics news media content to try to give it gravitas, give it credence. Continued influence effect is the continued reliance on inaccurate information in people's memory and reasoning after a credible correction has been presented. Again, think about teachers, very intelligent people with a lot of education, not being able to change their mind about learning styles because it's been drilled into them. And then the illusory truth effect is repeated information is more likely to be judged true than novel information because it's become more familiar. So this is a nice little flowchart of what are some things you can do in terms of looking at misinformation. So if you know that misinformation is expected, right? You're a vaccine company, you've come up with a really great vaccine that, I don't know, will treat the common cold. Fantastic, give it to me. I don't want to get colds, right? And you want to kind of try to get ahead of that curve. You want to pre-bunk, or they even call it inoculating, like taking a vaccine, right? Provide warning, explain misleading techniques, give people the heads up of what others might try to convince them of. That's not right. If misinformation is already out there, as it's just the case for a lot of things, you want to think about the visibility of misinformation. If the myth is largely unknown, right, then you want to keep monitoring, withhold debunking, but like be prepared to debunk. If the myth has some traction, right, you want to think about, are your framing and agenda fluid? You want to set an agenda if possible. You want to provide accurate information and withhold debunking, so you set your agenda. If the framing is out there and it's fixed, vaccines cause autism, right? You want to debunk often and properly. So fact, again, you want to lead with the facts, but only if it's clear and sticky. And then you want to debunk the myths, and then you want to talk about the fallacies, and end with the fact again. Sandwich it. Use that recency and primacy effect to your advantage, right? One of the things we try to avoid is what's called the backfire effect, which is where a correction inadvertently increases the belief in or reliance on misinformation relative to a pre-correction or no correction baseline. And so the idea here is that, like, the myth is presented repeatedly, and so repetition increases familiarity, so you start to believe it even more. And then debunking can overwhelm familiarity increases. But if the familiarity increase is greater than a debunking benefit, a backfire effect would occur, and debunking a myth makes it more familiar, but the debunking usually overpowers that. There are a couple exceptions. So backfire effect has happened several times in the advancement of like civil rights or women's rights, for example. So in the 80s, following the women's movement of the 60s and 70s, there was a big backfire where people were just like, well, I don't know what women are talking about. They already have what they need, blah, 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 blah. And you know, you want to kind of watch for that. So again, how do you successfully debunk? You've got your fact. You start with that. Especially if it's clear, if you can make it pithy and sticky, make it simple, concrete, and plausible. Tell a story. People remember things better in stories, right? Warn about the myth. Warn beforehand that a myth is coming and only mention it once. Don't keep re-mentioning the myth, right? Because then you're just reinforcing it. Explain how the myth is misleading. And then finish with the fact. Again, primacy and recency effect. And you need to say it multiple times if possible. And make sure it provides an alternative causal explanation so that people will buy in. All right, so we did get through this today. So on Monday, we are going to spend the class doing an activity about integrating information from multiple sources, which is a really good skill to learn. And so again, even if you can't be here in person, please plan to sign on Zoom like a lot of folks did today, because I'll be able to provide guidance on the assignment that way as well. Thank you all for being here, and have a great weekend. No class Friday because I'll be in Seattle.